won't work it. Don't take the rest, you won't make it. I don't even care where this road leads. All I know is when my heart is gotta live a tree.
Boom. There you are, brother. How you doing?
How you doing, my man?
Randall, I am doing pretty good. And my brother, it is good to speak to another Melburnian. How are you finding these lockdowns? Oh, there you are.
Man, I'm not actually in Melbourne. I'm in Sydney.
I don't know. I got the idea you're in Melbourne. So
because I tag my videos as being in Melbourne because I feel like that audience needs it the most, right?
No doubt. And it's probably a good idea that the powers to be don't exactly know your location right now. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
You're exactly right.
Yeah, I'm not sure what it's like in Sydney, but the police have been going on power trips here in Melbourne. Just over the weekend, I saw some pretty crazy stuff, and it's been like that for, I guess, over a year now. I mean, these lockdowns have been going on for what? We're going on a year and a half now. It's still in a state of emergency.
It's
crazy,
insane.
man. Yeah. So
insane, dude.
let me introduce you. So this is my podcast. It's called The Crucial Journey. I'm a fellow content creator. Ladies and gentlemen, freaks and geeks, brothers and sisters around the world, we have Randall Evans, aka the Deactivist, in the house. This guy is a hilarious truth bomber, a content creator, a filmmaker. This guy has been talking about a lot of the things that are going on in the world right now, specifically in Australia, mate. And I love the fact that you go into the comedy, man. I think that's something that we very much need right now, considering that things are getting so sick, man. You know, I mean, I'd love to hear your view on everything that's going on. I mean, I know you're a fellow libertarian, so there's probably going to be a lot that we agree on. But do you want to just talk about yourself? I'm sure there's a lot that you do that I haven't covered. If you want to give yourself introduction, how you got into what you're doing, and then we can take it from there, brother.
Yeah, so I guess my journey started a few years back where I knew that there was something wrong, but I couldn't quite pinpoint what that was. So I would read these conspiracies, I would read up on the news. I'm like, there's something fundamentally wrong with the way people are consuming this news media. So I made a documentary where I got 10 actors and I said, okay, you're a scientific expert, you're a journalist, you're this, you're that, gave them a script, and I made a documentary telling people about fake news before fake news was even a phrase. And then at the end of the documentary, they all say, oh, look, we're reading off a script. I'm an actor. My name is Fred, and I'm not a scientific expert. And then so throughout that process, if you read the YouTube comments, most people are like, wow, I just got conned. This wasn't even real. And because it's so easy through a medium like we have to manipulate people. I mean, if you wanted to, you could take this recording right now, cut it up, and you can make me look like an absolute twat. I hope you don't do that. But it's actually quite easy. It's quite easy when you're shooting a real documentary to just select the bits and pieces that people say, because you might not agree with them. You might be like, oh, well, that sounds a little bit too extreme for my liking, so I'm going to cut that out, and I'm just going to have her say this nice thing here. So I knew that the media were, whether their intention was malicious or not, I knew that they were manipulating the public. So I stumbled across Ron Paul, like I'm sure you know Ron Paul and a lot of your audience, and he was hitting all the same notes that I was hitting. And then so that was my kind of door into libertarianism. And then through that, I went into study a little bit of economics and study history. And it all seems to make sense now. That's not to say that I'm infallible and that I'm not stupid and wrong and dumb all the time. But it is to say that I do feel that I have a solid foundation now from which to commentate on news media and commentate on what politicians are doing. So I guess that was my origin story. And you mentioned the comedy that I have in my videos. Now, I think it's really important. And I'd like to hear your take on this, because you're a musician, and some of you've got an amazing voice, dude. Like,
oh, thanks, bro.
Hats off to you.
I didn't realize you checked out my stuff, but thank you, brother. Appreciate that.
Yeah, it's very, very cool. A little bit jealous, but that's okay. That's okay.
Well, I'm very jealous of you, man, because I think you're legitimately funny. But well, enough with the praise, man. We'll get into the meats and bolts of things soon enough, man. I'm sure there'll be plenty of things we'll disagree on. But kudos to you, man. I love what you're doing. I love the fact that you're talking about things that are very uncomfortable right now. I'm sure YouTube doesn't think too highly of your views, but we'll get into that. I caught you up with your origin story there. So you got into libertarianism, or this whole, I guess people define themselves differently, but I'd say you're a Ron Paul libertarian, someone that obviously believes in individual freedom. Yeah.
I think so. I think I fluctuate between Ron Paul and Michael Malice. So some days I'm libertarian and some days I'm total
Anarchist.
anarchy. But you
Yeah.
know, that's the sphere I live in. Yeah.
Yeah, man. I find it very interesting how people identify themselves in the libertarian camps because, granted, I think the libertarian philosophy is very objective. You know, as human beings are, we tend to look at things subjectively, and you find people branching out into these different areas of libertarianism. And the frustrating thing I find is when I hear people that call themselves libertarians, and then we disagree on things that, or you have some libertarians that have a completely status attitude towards libertarianism. You know, like I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
one of the governors or politicians in the United States that identifies as a libertarian is talking about lockdowns and trying to mandate that stuff. I'm like, okay, that's the most unlibertarian thing you can
Yeah.
say. But it's interesting how we diverge into the types. Like you mentioned that you're more Michael Malice, and I think fundamentally, I mean, let's get to what it is to be a libertarian. I mean, I'd like to hear your perspective on the philosophy. I think this might give people a better understanding of what we're talking about here when we talk about this philosophy. So, what does being a libertarian mean to you to begin with?
Yeah, so for me, it's, and I don't think it should be, I shouldn't start that sentence with for me. I think for libertarians, it should start with the premise that we shouldn't aggress upon another person against their will. So it all is based on the non-aggression principle. So I might not like that people take certain drugs. I might not like that people live a certain lifestyle, but that doesn't mean that I should force them not to do it. That those two things shouldn't go hand in hand. And what we find time and time again is that the government equates these two things. They think, oh, XYZ is morally wrong, therefore we should make a law to bar X, Y, and Z. And they forget that morals are actually quite subjective across different people and different cultures. What's immoral to me, in my eyes, might be totally moral and fine for you. And I mean, the thing that really gets me is that I'm quite a boring guy. I live a boring lifestyle. I don't go out and party. I don't do too many things that society would deem extreme. But am I still with you?
You're still with me, but I'm just getting a bit of like, can you hear me clearly? Because I'm having a bit of difficulty hearing you. I was getting a bit of interruption, but I can hear you. I'm following you.
Okay.
Am I coming through all right?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, you're saying you're a boring person. I find that hard to believe, man. You seem like a pretty active, funny guy. So, yeah,
Well,
continue.
in terms of like my lifestyle isn't too extreme. There's not many people would look at me and say, "Hey, he's a bit of an outcast of society." Like I obey most rules where I find it reasonable, although I never stick to the speed limit. But I don't think anyone does. I think they're just suggestions. But the thing that really gets me is the arbitrary use of power. This kind of unfathomable amount of power that people have over our lives for no reason in which I can perceive. I don't see any reasons why they have this power. And to that point is that we never consented to this. We were just born into it. We didn't consent. We didn't say, okay, government of Australia, you are going to provide X, Y, and Z, and therefore I'm going to sign saying that I'm going to pay taxes for these services. We never did that. And if people think that we need to have a government, then okay, well, you need to sign a contract to say that you agree to all of these terms, because just imposing that upon someone is not very moral to begin with, but it's also quite problematic when we get to things like pandemics and how we deal with these situations.
Exactly. And I find it interesting how you define morality. And granted, we do tend to look at this subjectively, but I find the way in which I define it within a libertarian worldview is I don't believe that you should be able to force anyone to do anything unless, if they're not harming anyone in the process, you know? And I feel like the government comes in with this other moral worldview that says that if we think that something bad is going to happen, it justifies the use of force, because it's somehow a moral thing to force people to do things if you see there being a problem in the future. And this is where you get the whole safety moral worldview. And this is when you get the government trying to mandate things like locking people up in their home or telling you that you can't take certain substances, or we have this whole attitude of a passive violence, you know, the idea that we're seeing horrible things take place and the fact that we're not doing something to prevent it. That's the morality that the government tends to work in. And I think some people tend to adopt. And it's interesting when you have a look at the philosophy of well, politics. And I'd say that some years ago, like back in the 50s and 70s, it was far more libertarian leaning. Like we used to define violence in these very narrow categories, like violence in the realm of force, theft, fraud, that kind of stuff, and now it's moved into this realm where you're a violent person simply if you are seeing people that don't have money and you're not allowing the government to tax you, and that's when we move
Yeah.
into the 21st century model of morality. But I agree with you. The way in which I tend to look at libertarianism is basically people that want to live their own lives, that don't want to have government intervention. I always like to say that unless you have a consent-based system of morals, you can justify anything. So provided you're not harming anyone, right? You shouldn't be able to be forced to do anything if you don't give your consent. And this is pretty much the philosophy of libertarianism. And this stretches into anarchism as well. It's just I find that some libertarians, they tend to not take it all the way. They think in terms of practicality, like might be a good idea to have a bit of taxation here, might be a good idea to have state sanctioned violence on things that I like, but fundamentally to me, I just get down to the nuts and bolts, which is the non-aggression principle, the philosophy, and what I define as individual ethics. And we're looking at this in the realm of like negative rights. And I don't want to go into the nuts and bolts of this, but fundamentally it's, hey, look, don't harm anyone and don't force me to do anything, even if it requires helping people, if I'm not hurting anyone in the process.
Yeah, definitely. And
I think you there, brother. You still there?
Yeah. Am I not coming through?
Okay.
Hello.
I'm having a bit of trouble. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, just bear with me. I seem to be having a few technical issues here. I'm going to see if I can get you. But I'm not getting you on this. Let's see. I haven't muted you. Murphy's Law, Let's see.
Yeah.
See if I can change this.
I should probably talk while you're trying to fix your headphones so that.
Just bear with me one moment, brother. I'm still having trouble hearing you. All right, now try speaking.
Hello.
Okay, I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sorry about that, brother. I seem to be having some issues. But we got all the good stuff, and I might be able to edit all that. So, all right. Well, as long as you can hear me, that's good. I can hear you fine. I'll use my my inbuilt microphone. Sorry about that. So what are we talking about, brother?
That's a really good question. We're talking about technical difficulties and why it's sometimes good not to stream live. Case in point.
no doubt. But I guess we were talking about just the whole philosophy of libertarianism, and how you got into it. You mentioned that you're
I do remember what we were talking about, and I was going to say that this philosophy extended for myself into economics. In that, have you read Economics in One Lesson?
No, I haven't. The economic side of things is something which I'm not as schooled in. Like I know a lot of people get into libertarianism through the Austrian economics and stuff. I have a basic understanding, but I haven't read much on it. It's
a good read because it's outdated now, but some of the simple principles behind it hold true today, which is one of the things that economic experts or politicians will do is that they'll have a specific outcome that they want. And then because they have unlimited means in which to get this outcome, that means that they don't actually calculate what the risks are involved properly. So for example, if we talk about the Rona for a moment, if their outcome is to have 0 cases, they will lock down, they'll pay people not to work, they'll employ a really brutal police force to make sure people stay at home, all of these costs. But they don't calculate suicide rates. They don't calculate depression. They don't calculate people fleeing the state. They don't calculate any of these because they're only looking at the outcome. They're only looking at, okay, were the cases low? Yes, they were. Okay, then we succeeded. So the first lesson of economics is to look at things broadly, to say, no, we don't look at the one outcome. We look at all outcomes. Which is much more difficult, and it doesn't pay to have that as a soundbite on 7 News or 9 News. How do you explain that in 10 seconds? It's quite impossible. But you can say, yeah, we locked down and we've got less cases, and the general public say, oh, yay, thanks, Daniel, good job.
I always like to address that when I'm talking about this whole we're trying to mitigate people contracting the virus and people dying kind of thing, because at the end of the day, there are always going to be consequences expected consequences to what you're
Yeah.
doing, you know, and people kind of have this idea that you can predict the future anytime you put something in place. Like the future is definitive, but if we lock this amount of people down, the science, which everyone loves to make reference to, is going to ensure that we reduce the amount by this much, you know, or if we force people in their homes. And you have a look at history, and history has all of these untold consequences, you know, like you use force, you use control on people. And typically the untold consequences of that or unexpected consequences is sometimes people get angry. People start crusades against the government, you know, and then, or we have wars, more and more people dying. You can't always foresee this. And of course, you have suicide deaths. We have a look at what's going on in Melbourne right now. And I find that the media tends to be playing this down, but I happen to know people that have died through suicide. I mean, because of these lockdowns. And this is something that has affected my friends. This is something that is affecting many people's lives. And then, of course, we have people that are dying from not being able to go to elective surgery. So just this entire realm of unexpected consequences is something that I feel like is never really addressed within the governmental system. They'd prefer to have you believe that they can foresee the future with their heuristic models and because they understand the science.
Yeah, 100%. And you mentioned elective surgeries there. During the 2007, 2008 financial crisis, 500,000 people died in the US because of untreated cancer, of preventable cancer, because they couldn't afford to go to the hospital. Now, how much more is that going to be now with everything shut down for over a year? Like, and the amount of irrational fear that people have of going to the hospital in the first place. Oh, I've got a lump, but you know, I don't want to go to the hospital. There's too many COVID people there. I might get COVID, and then where would I be? I mean, there's so much blood on the media's hands for giving us this unbridled fear and not saying, hey, look, you know, kids, if they're asymptomatic, that nothing happens to them and they don't really spread it, so they should go to school. Or, you know, if you're 20 to 35 and you're quite healthy, you're pretty much going to be fine. You don't have to worry. You know, no one says that in the media. No one tells you, you know, you should lose weight if you want to survive, you know, the Rona. No one says that. But it's a very simple thing, you know. One of the biggest comorbidities for people who have died of coronavirus, if we take age out of the equation, is their body mass. You know, if you are overweight, if you are undertrained, if you don't have the lung capacity, you know, you should really be exercising. You know, it's like rewarding people with donuts for getting the vaccine is not a good message. You know, tell people you should exercise first and foremost, you know, get out in the sun.
Yeah, I feel like this issue characterizes how people look at even ethics in the sense that whereas people like you and I would imagine we believe in personal responsibility. It's like our responsibility to take care of our health, to make sure that we're not overweight, and to take care of whether or not we're going to contract the virus even, you know. But a lot of people put this in the responsibility of the government. And their whole attitude is, well, the government should be making sure that people eat the right foods, get the right kind of exercise. It's like people want to be told what to do. And you brought up something that kind of perked my interest there, and that people feel as if this is something I've gathered from just speaking to people about this. People have, anytime I tell people, I make my libertarian arguments like the government's going to be responsible for all of these deaths if it implements these lockdowns. They have this mindset that by the government not doing anything, that the government is responsible. You know how we were talking about passive violence earlier? Most people seem to have this belief system that it's the responsibility of the government to take care of them. And if the government sits idle and allows a virus to kill lots of people, then it's the government's fault. And my attitude is it's not the government, and I believe it'd be your attitude, that it's not the government's responsibility to babysit you. I mean, from a classical perspective, I mean, the only role that a government was originally supposed to have is protect the individual rights of people. And this is along the lines of, you know, when someone has actually committed violence, like stolen something, committed fraud, or we're talking about, this is common law stuff, right? But now the government has taken on this realm of being God, essentially, it's got this predictive analysis of trying to prevent thought crimes, trying to prevent people from passing viruses when they haven't even done it. Like the thing that's frustrating me right now is everyone is guilty until proven innocent. You walk down the street. I'm not sure if you've been following what's going on in Melbourne in terms of the interactions with the police, but over the weekend, there's a guy called Nick Patterson that is He's an ex-UFC fighter, and there are plenty of videos of this guy having conversational jiu-jitsu battles with the police officers, basically schooling them on the law. And what was the point I was trying to make with this? This guy does not take any shit whatsoever from the police. And the police have this attitude where they're taking people like this, using them as an example, essentially trying to they're trying to illustrate the fact that you were guilty until proven innocent by simply the fact that you're not wearing a mask, right? And people like Nick Patterson are trying to make the argument, like you'll see this interaction with him with the police. There's a video that's going viral at the moment where he's explaining to these people that you can't, if I'm not under arrest, I am not guilty of any crime. And the police have this entire mentality that because we're in COVID times and we see you as being a threat by simply not having a mask, we have the right to essentially arrest you. And this is the paradigm that the government works under. And this to me illustrates just the perversion of the system that we're working under at the moment. Now you are guilty until proven innocent by simply virtue of me walking down the street and not having a mask. A police officer can approach me and essentially arrest me because there's the potential that I may be transmitting a virus, as opposed to, oh, I can see that you have committed a crime and now I'm going to arrest you. And people like Nick Patterson are essentially trying to expose that the government has no right to be doing this. Police officers have no right to be doing this. And what's happening is they're essentially just getting the shit kicked out of them. And this stuff has been taken up in court, like it's going to the high courts here at the moment. But what's happening every step of the way is the police are doing everything they can to not allow this thing to see justice. And I find it incredibly frustrating because I still have this idea that people are innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of that quote, truth is treason in the empire of lies. You know, if you tell the truth, then, you're putting a target on your back. But this idea that the police are doing the right thing by going up to someone who's not wearing a mask, and if they don't comply, they get in their face, arrest them, throw them in a paddy wagon with 4 other people who aren't wearing a mask. Does that actually help to stop the spread, or does that actually spread it further? I don't understand how them actually using their physical presence upon your person is actually, how do you do that at 1.5 meters? I don't think that's actually possible to do. So that frustrates me a lot. And the other thing is that when I've attended protests here in Sydney, I'll kind of stand back because I try and make myself non-threatening, and I'll have my camera and just kind of commentate, because if I get arrested, then you can't see anything. And I'll hear the officers say, pick out the most easy target for them to apprehend. They don't point at the massive islander in the corner. They don't point at the guy who looks like he can hold his own. They point at like the skinny hippie with long hair, and they go, all right, let's get him. We'll get that guy. They never bite off something that's of, pick on someone your own size. They don't do that. They pick on the smallest guy, unless someone's been, quite obnoxious. Then of course they have to shut him up. But yeah, I just find their mentality, their group mentality, to be, quite scary actually. If it wasn't, if I couldn't laugh about it,
sure,
I'd be crying.
Well, I tend to agree with you. I feel like this applies to the media as well. They'll typically pick the low-hanging fruit. They'll expose, the Karens to show that they're ignorant, don't know what they're talking about. But when people actually want to make legitimate arguments, like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Rona. She's one of these lawyers that actually believes in human rights. And you have a look at some of the arguments that she's making, and they're just flawless, but they still want to expose her as, like, they've essentially tried to take away her license, and they made these arguments that she's somehow endangering her clients, by providing misinformation when she's not heard there's not been a single negative report made against her by any of her clients. But the media, rather than it's weird, because whereas I agree with you that the media typically focuses on the people that are making silly arguments, but I'm finding that when people make themselves a target, like Rona Tefaha, there are activists that really understand what's going on here at the moment and expose what's going on, they silence them just like that. And this is what's been happening to people that are speaking the truth about this. What I would love to happen is to actually have a conversation. Why aren't we seeing debates, like actual debates, in regard? I mean, granted, we're seeing this in Parliament apparently in regards to the efficacy of the lockdowns. But in regards to the topic which we're not really able to talk about, I call it the boom shakalaka. All right, we're not seeing any real debates take place about this. It's like we're in this world now where as soon as you have a legitimate, like you made some arguments, a while back, just in regards to like why are police officers trying to prevent people, like stop people that aren't wearing masks when by attacking these people, aren't they transmitting the virus? And that's a legitimate argument. In regards to the boom shakalaka, there are plenty of legitimate arguments. Like one of the things I like to bring up that doesn't seem to be addressed is if you have the boom shakalaka, the vaccine, I'll just say it. Why is it so important for everyone else to get this thing if you have this and it's working, right? But none of these conversations seem to make it to the mainstream media and are looked at seriously. It's almost as if it would be far too disadvantageous to the obviously to the narrative if these ideas were exposed. And as a result, we have people being silenced, people being censored. And this is what the fact checkers are doing on Facebook, YouTube. No doubt you probably experienced that to some extent. And it's like, yeah, rather than just attacking the low-hanging fruit, my friend, they're going after anyone that has any credible argument right now, because it's all about risk management. It's all about managing the consequences, like we don't want anyone that even has a bit of truth, because, hey, it might discourage people from getting the vaccine. That's what I'm
and I mean, I was making this argument right at the start, which is, they were saying stay at home, save lives, stay at home, save lives. It's okay. Well, you can stay at home. Why do I have to stay at home if you're staying at home? Like, you inside your home with your windows closed, and you can order your food. You can spray it with Glen 20 before it comes into your house. You'll be fine. It's actually impossible for you to get a virus if you lock yourself in your house and you have all your surfaces cleaned and no one interacts with you. Why do I have to stay home? It's because it's actually this other part of the equation, which is the jealousy and the envy. It's like they look at someone who's living a free life, and they're one, jealous of that. They're two, they want to control that. And three, it's kind of, when you, I don't know if you experience this, but when you have a certain train of thought, which you believe is correct, but no one around you sees that, it's kind of like, it makes you feel uncomfortable.
Absolutely.
And you can either say, maybe I'm wrong, or maybe they're wrong. And most people say, no, they're wrong. And then that causes this kind of group attack on someone who's like, it's like we're a cancer on society.
Absolutely.
And they have to remove us so that they can continue functioning. It's quite bizarre.
I love this line of thought, because I think this exposes what's really going on. Because I think if you try to look at this logically, and most libertarians tend to be logical people, because it actually requires, there's been psychological tests that have shown that, you have a look at the political spectrum, and libertarians tend to be more based in objective truths, reason, logic, whereas people more on the left tend to be more intuitive, artistic, that kind of stuff, and deal in spectrum ideas. And it requires logical thought to look at things. But what we're seeing at the moment, I don't think you can make sense out of what is going on in terms of the justification for the restrictions if you're looking at this logically. That's why I think libertarians are questioning this. It only makes sense, if, to me anyway, if you look at this on the meta level, like you realize that, okay, there are psychological motives behind what is going on right now. Like, why is, and this is going to sound no doubt conspiratorial, but the reality is it makes no sense to compel everyone to get the boom shakalaka if it's working for you. It makes no sense unless, of course, it's important for everyone to buy into the narrative. It's important for everyone to bend to this consensus reality. Otherwise, it's going to take away from the overarching goal here. And this is where we get into like the reality of what's going on right now. Like, that there is a push right now to essentially get everyone buying into this idea that this is something that is incredibly serious, incredibly dangerous. And we really haven't spoken about the whole COVID-19 thing per se. That's another story in of itself. But my view, just to delve into this without delving to the point where this video gets flagged, is that I do not believe that the reactions, let's say, to this thing are as warranted as they're making it out to me. And I think they're trying to make it sound like it's warranted because it's necessary for them to justify the rollout of the vaccines. I mean, without wanting to go. And the thing is, I hate the fact that this has been brought into the realm of conspiracy right now. It doesn't take I think the biggest conspiracy is that people that have money and power do not conspire to bring things into fruition. Into it, it's not just about money when you have billions and billions of dollars. It's about control and power. And it makes perfect sense that people want to sell their product. Hell, if I was a somewhat successful person and I wanted to sell a product that I had, I would prevent anyone that was saying anything bad from saying this stuff on the internet. And then I would pay people, I'd pay organizations to only say good stuff about my product. And I would tell them to prevent anyone that is saying stuff that is not good about my product from speaking out. And this is what, I mean, we know for a fact the president of Belarus, I think it was last year, came out and said that he'd been offered how many millions and millions of dollars to essentially apply lockdowns on his country, and he rejected it because he didn't think it was justified. So we obviously know that there is pressure that has been put on people in power, been put on governments in order to roll certain things out. And it makes so much sense to me. But as soon as you highlight this kind of stuff, it almost sounds conspiratorial to the normies. And of course,
yeah. So the way I see the rollout of the boom shakalaka is that if they don't roll this out,
I say it a lot. Yeah.
If they don't roll it out, that's going to mean that they can't take credit for when this is all blown over. Like, the cases are already going down, the deaths are already going down. If they don't have this kind of nail in the coffin, they're not going to be able to say, we did it. We did what was in the best interest of the people. Thank you, Operation Warp Speed or Operation Biden, whatever you want to call it. They won't have that credit to their name. And people will be like, oh, well, what happened to the virus? It seems to have gone without, so that's why you'll notice that before any kind of major rollout of the jab, there'll be an event like a massive lockdown or something. And then they're like, oh, but if only we all got the jab, we'd all be okay.
I don't know, Randy. That sounds like conspiracy theory to me. Are you saying that we need lockdowns in order to get people to take the jab? Even though one of the reasons that you can only leave at the moment is to get the jab. That's what's going on. We're currently on the lockdown, by the way. It's just reasons that you can leave your home is to actually get the jab. And strangely enough, the emergency was supposed to expire, and it's been extended until December again, corresponding with these lockdowns. How appropriate, hey?
Yeah, your mic seems to be. I think the cable might not be.
Let's see if I can fix that up.
Oh, that's better.
Check
now.
1 2. Sorry about that. You can hear me all right?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Sorry about that. All right. Let us know if it happens again. All right. So
easy.
I want to hear your thoughts on. We're going to go a little conspiratorial with this, man. But what are your thoughts on what's going on in terms of not just the lockdowns, but in terms of this entire narrative? I mean, what are the things that you are perhaps skeptical about without being too, I guess, straightforward to the point that the fact checkers deem that this may be misinformation?
It's a good question. I haven't had my conspiracy hat on in a long time, but what I will say is that there has been, and this has just been uncovered over the past few weeks, there has been a massive cover up to try and show that this didn't come from a lab in Wuhan. Massive cover up. And there's been leaked emails, I think today, maybe 6 hours ago, from Dr. Fauci emailing back and forth about the Wuhan lab and about how masks don't actually work and all of these things. So saying the opposite to what he's been saying to the public.
I'm on that. So yeah.
There's massive interests involved in here. There's massive interests in terms of US government. I mean, I doubt that it would have been as big a deal if Trump wasn't in power when it came out, because they really wanted to pin it on him. I mean, I'm not a Trumpian, obviously, but the Project Veritas things that are coming out about how, we really had to have the death numbers on the side of the news cycle all the time to scare people. And then we really tried to connect it to President Trump because he's doing such a bad job. And now we got rid of him. And now we want Biden to be the hero. So if I was a conspiracy theorist, I'd be like, there's merit to that. But I honestly think it's it's less about that they have this sort of kind of end goal and more about the fact that all governments and all politicians are power hungry to begin with. So if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And this was the thing that I was scared about most during the first lockdown. They were saying, 14 days to flatten the curve. I'm like, if you give them 14 days, you're giving them everything. You're literally giving them everything because you are consenting to this. So I was contemplating how to show this in a video and I didn't quite know how to do it, but I'll just explain my thought process.
I just had the perfect idea, like for a skit, man.
Tell me.
I'm thinking, as a guy, you want to get with a girl, right? And you're dating a girl and you're kind of, come on, just let me kiss you, just a little kiss. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
And you're like, let me just, you know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about? And then before you know it, the girl's like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this. How'd you get me to do this? Yeah. Thus, we have government. Yeah. I feel like.
Yeah. And I mean, the studies show that most rape is to do with power. So, okay. I mean,
I thought you were going to say most rape has to do with like slow incrementations of, will you let me grab your, but
most rape starts with a government official for sure. I had a friend who told me that democracy is just gang rape because, the gang is the majority and the victim's the minority and they all vote. And then they have their way with you. But
just to harp on that though, because I feel like a lot of people, to me, it all comes down to how things have morphed over time. Because granted, I'm in complete agreement with you. I don't care if a million people are telling me, saying it's okay to rape someone, right? Because they voted on it. But there's this weird thing where ideas seem to morph over time, this Overton window where eventually enough people say that, this is what it means. This is what human rights means. This is what democracy means. There was a time when democracy, I understand the ancient origins of it, rule of the people. But there was a time when we had this idea that even within a democracy, you have individual rights. You listen to people like JFK speak, a few decades ago, and then he was someone of the Democratic Party, and they speak about how the rights of the individual are not generated by that do not come from the generosity of the state, but they come from the hand of God. And it's this idea that democracy, just because you have a democracy doesn't mean you can vote on everything, right? But now we've moved into this realm where democracies allow you to vote on everything, even whether or not you get to leave your home. Like classically, it was on democratic issues like what we do with our combined resources, like our monies, that we, let's say within a voluntary society, a libertarian society, we've all contributed to, not on whether or not we decide to force certain individuals to be raped, which in a sense I think is going on, So it's just something I want to harp on because people always use that analogy. And I know a lot of people believe in democracy in terms of like a protectorate, but we morphed it in this idea where now it's like, look, let's vote on. I get so frustrated when I'm having a debate with someone and they're like, let's bring it to a vote. Let's bring it. I'm like, what? You're not putting a vote to whether or not I get raped.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you. I just wanted to make that point there, bro.
There's a few things there. That's one of the reasons why. I mean, there are 1,000 reasons not to watch Q&A. But if you ever watch Q&A, if you have the stomach for it, and they show the audience shots of a bunch of angry people watching the politicians or the media or whoever it is on the panel, and the reason they're so angry is because they want a share of the tax dollars. They're like, why aren't we spending money here? Why aren't you spending money for what I want? And I'm like, dude, this is stolen money. You have no right to it. Why don't you just shut up and make your community better on your own? But that's beside the point. I think it was, I'm going to be grilled here if I get it wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was Woodrow Wilson who was president of the United States. And he called a meeting to discuss gridiron, the American football, because there was, I think there was mass concussions or injuries or something, that's typical with that sport. And that might seem normal thing to do, but it was actually the first time that a president actually got involved in a social issue, because before then it's like, that's not the president's role. Like you don't ask people to vote on things like this. That has nothing to do with you. But now it's just grown so much that it's like every single thing is subject to vote. How much land tax should we pay? What road should, like everything, our healthcare system. And I thought during the pandemic, I was like, well, if we're afraid that the hospital system is going to be overwhelmed, why don't I opt out? I'll sign a form and it says, if I get COVID, I don't get these services, and then I can live my life freely. Oh no, well, you can't do that. You're not allowed to opt out of our civilization. Well, why not? Why not? Absolutely.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I was listening to a podcast where a guy was talking about the history. And it's interesting when you have a look at the history of Australia versus the United States. And it seems that most of these nations have gone through this change where, like we were talking about how we're talking about hospitals and like being able to opt out of this medical service. And there was a time, people feel like this is a weird thing, but there was a time when governments did not actually have any say in regards to insurance and healthcare. And people essentially would opt into healthcare services. They'd have some kind of a communal health service, a medical service, and they would choose if they wanted to opt into that. And it would be competitive because essentially, obviously, the best health services would end up charging more. But then at some point, I can't remember what the rationale was, but probably some governmentalist bullshit, like we need to prevent you guys from being exploited and so forth. They got their hands involved in this, and they made this. They basically applied this through force, and they got rid of these communal style healthcare services. And you see this happening in not just in Australia, but in the United States. And this is essentially the model that has taken place throughout history, whereas we've had more of this libertarian-like society. Like in the United States and Australia, we didn't have income tax until at some point last century. And then eventually the government just says, oh, we got to do it just this one time. 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Oh, we just got to have tax just so we can fund this war. And then before you know it, it's applied and it becomes the norm. And now we're at a point where, just last year, we were at a point where the government stepped forward into this realm where it deemed it appropriate to lock people in their homes. I mean, to my knowledge, we've never really seen that here. Maybe at some point, during some war, I don't know, but that was like a weird thing. And now it's become the norm. Like a year later, the government is just switching us into these lockdowns, these draconian lockdowns, just like that. And they slowly start turning up the water. Now, they're actually talking about not being able to leave the state, man. And
wow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if you've come across that, but here in Australia, man, like Scott Morrison is trying to put this legislation through where, and he's using this clever legalese by saying that, oh, look, man, we're not going to prevent you from leaving the country if you haven't been vaccinated, but obviously the states have the right to apply whatever sanctions they want. And we're just going to give you the right to leave and go to other states if you have been vaccinated. When, look, constitutionally, like the states have no right to be preventing people from leaving the country, regardless of what state of emergency bullshit that's been put in the Constitution, which they've recently done. You know what I mean? So I know that goes up a little bit. I just found it interesting how you mentioned, something that seems so very, like such a fair idea. Having healthcare services where people can opt in, and then somewhere down the line, governments take away that right and say it's in the interest of safety, and this is the norm that we're all working under now.
Yeah, and I think this is important where the evolution of a libertarian kind of spills over into economics, because it can really give you a nice basis to combat some of these stupid policies. So with healthcare, it might sound nice, let's have universal free healthcare, but nothing is free. Everything has to be paid for. Every time that you go to the doctor, you're paying for that. You're paying it through your taxes. But the problem with, doing it this way, you might think, oh, well, it's a big pool of money, therefore we can afford to pay it. But the issue is that when you go to the doctors and he's like, oh, so what's wrong? Oh, I've got a bit of a sore throat. Oh, okay. Well, I can prescribe you. And he takes his time, he writes you a prescription, and you go away. You don't pay that directly. You're not giving him money directly, which means he's charging the government on your behalf, but he can charge whatever he wants. What the hell does the government know about how much his resources cost? They don't know. So you will see over time that the price has just been completely inflated everywhere where they have socialized medicine. And the thing that really annoyed me about, the initial stages of lockdown, and they're saying, oh, hospitals are being overwhelmed. Well, in 2007 in New York, they had to put up tent hospitals because the flu season was so bad. And it's like, well, it was overwhelmed then, it's a terrible system. And one of the things in the United States, if I can just take a little sidestep,
sure,
is they have this regulation called a certificate of need, which is hilarious because it abbreviates to CON. So it's CON regulation, which basically means this. If you're a hospital, you're an existing hospital in New York City, you have a certificate of need. So if you would like to open a hospital, you have to go to that existing hospital and say, hey, do you think there's a need for another hospital? And they'll say, no, I don't think so. I don't think there's a need for you. And they just stifle the competition. You need that certificate of need, which is granted by your direct competition. Imagine that for any other industry. Imagine you start a gym and you go into an area, you're like, I reckon I could start a CrossFit gym here. And you have to go to fitness first and say, hey, do you think there's a need for another gym? Nah, I don't think so. We've got it covered. Don't worry, mate. So you've got this, like you said, a complete lack of competition, a complete lack of transparency
That's
in
the heart of
price.
it. Yeah.
It's just insane. And then we're like, oh, we need to save the system. I say, let it die. Let's opt out. Let it die.
That gets to the heart of the problem, because whereas you look at this economically, I think it really gets to the heart of this, which is that if the government has, like, they get nothing, no punishment from getting this stuff wrong, then obviously they're not incentivized. I mean, it all comes down to incentive, right? Like, obviously, if I run a business, I have an incentive to ensure that I do a good job, that I'm trustworthy. But we're in a situation now where our politicians, our health, well, it seems to me that a lot of our healthcare systems, I mean, they're not incentivized to get this thing right. I mean, and whereas this kind of contradicts what I'm saying. Like, I feel like the motivation as to why we're seeing so much misinformation right now is that the government doesn't want to be wrong, because there is going to be some kind of backlash. But because I think one of the reasons why we're seeing the government's unwilling to go back, like you were talking about, this evidence coming about in regards to the virus, in Wuhan and all this kind of stuff, and Fauci not wanting to change his stance. And I think when someone takes a position on something, particularly the government, whether it's Fauci, I mean, just we talk about governments and humans as being separate, but this is just a human thing, right? Like, people typically don't want to go back on what their initial claim was. Therefore, there's this push to not acknowledge the fact that, let's say, the lockdowns were a bad idea, even though we're seeing, and there have been so many scientific reports that have come out on this to show that they don't work. According to the scientific journals, of course, this is YouTube, and lockdowns are an amazing thing, but you know what I'm saying? Governments can't come out and say, oh, wait, we've actually looked at the information, and now the lockdowns, it seems they don't really work. Generally because there's going to be a lot of backlash. They're going to realize that they're responsible for all these deaths. And we can apply this to certain drugs, which I will not mention the name of. Like, we're talking about Trump a while back about how, like, the whole thing with Trump and that drug, which will not be mentioned. And there's a lot of evidence, but of course, it's all nonsense, because if Trump is right about this, we can't possibly have that. It means that we were wrong to deny people. Like, in Queensland, this drug was actually made illegal for doctors to prescribe. Now, this has been the case for some months now, and there is a lot of evidence and I don't want to go down this route, but there's actually a lot of evidence from scientific journals to actually show that it's very effective. So I think from the governmental perspective, medical perspective, is that, oh no, if we acknowledge that we were wrong, we have all these deaths in our hand. And whereas I feel like on one hand, the government organizations don't want to admit they were wrong because of the backlash, because it's going to affect them. On another hand, it's like there is no incentive, like there is no accountability or at least there is not enough accountability. Like, politicians need to be the kind of politicians where if they get things wrong, they get the public set loose on them. But it seems to be this case where, oh, look, mate, we got the science wrong, and I'm out of office, and look, now someone else is in charge, and it's not my fault.
Yeah. Hey, what's going on with Daniel Andrews? He fell down the stairs, or maybe was pushed. What's going on there?
He's been out of action for quite a while now. Apparently, he had a nasty fall, and the interesting thing is that it seems the narrative seems to be he's getting so much love. Like, I'm seeing on dating profiles, women having showing photos of them with Dan Andrews, saying, "Oh, we love you, Dan." And there's this whole "I stand with Dan" movement, and I mock that. I'm like, I stand with Dan. I love Daniel Andrews. But the flip side of that is that there are a lot of people that are, and I don't think it's a small community of people. I think the media is playing this game where they are trying to present this narrative that everyone loves Dan, but there are a lot of people that are angry about what's going on, because a lot of people have lost jobs. A lot of people are feeling the hit of the lockdowns right now, and they're angry with Daniel Andrews. They think he's a complete dimwit for forcing these lockdowns. I think the more libertarian leaning people tend to have this mentality. And at the moment, strangely enough, he's technically not, I don't think he's technically returned. But from what I understand, in fact, I don't want to speak out of turn, but it's his administration that put forward the extension of the state of emergency, and that was obviously Daniel Andrews' whole thing. So obviously his will has still been enacted, and I think I really feel as if, regardless of who's in charge right now, because there was a point when I thought this was a Dan Andrews thing, and I wanted to leave Melbourne. I actually wanted to go to Queensland. This is last year when everyone was, well, a lot of people looking at Dan Andrews as being this crazy tyrant, and he's been quoted as saying ridiculous things like, "Who cares about human rights when people are dying? When the whole idea of human rights is to protect human lives, you know?" And like he's making quotes, you know, referencing Stalin and things like that. But the reality is, a lot of people are very much in support of him, and we're also seeing the same thing mirrored in other states. It's not a Dan Andrews thing. There are plenty of other politicians in different states are applying the same kind of intense lockdowns. Like in Queensland, I think it was, they had a policy where you even had to have your mask if you were inside your car.
In the car, yeah, I saw that.
And look, ScoMo is pushing this agenda, so it's not brought to one individual. What I personally believe is that these people are obviously beholden to, you know, certain interests, you know, interest groups, like whether they have ties to, I don't want to make any claims here, but it's pretty obvious that there are incentives involved in putting forward certain legislation. And I think all of them are essentially under some big banner of like New World Order bullshit, you know, for lack of a better word. And that's pretty much that's pretty much what's bringing forth all the legislation and so forth. Because obviously, I mean, there's a reason why we're seeing the same kind of legislation being enacted in different countries around the world. You know, obviously we're reporting to the World Health Organization, which is influenced by obviously Bill Gates, one of the biggest backers we have. There's certain, it's like this pyramidal structure, hierarchy. And essentially at the very top, we are seeing orders being brought forth, and we're seeing these lackeys essentially bring forth these orders. And that's why it seems as if we're all, for the first time in the history of the world, we are under lockdown. I don't think this has ever happened. I mean, granted, you've had pandemics in the past, but I don't think we've ever had a situation where we've had this kind of draconian lockdown happening, not just in Australia, but in Canada, in the United States, and the same kind of obfuscations of the Constitution, the same kind of Nuremberg violations. Like in Australia, I thought it was crazy when they made it illegal to protest. Like, I'm not sure if you follow this, Randy, but they were essentially arresting people for protesting. There was a woman that simply posted on her Facebook that she was going to a march. You would have seen the video on that. She was essentially, reprimanded. And this stuff is going on in Canada as well. Now, they've actually made it illegal for people to protest against the lockdowns. The Constitution means nothing, regardless of whether or not it's in Australia or the United States. It's been completely neglected. And it's this weird world right now. This is how I'm seeing it, where everything is subject to the state, and we're all following the science. Like the very idea of human rights, you know, and this whole thing is consistent, I think, with libertarian philosophy, that there are individual rights, is all subject to safety. So essentially, we're in a situation where the safety dictates law now, and it's a weird time, man. And to be honest with you, for the first time, like I'm getting a little concerned in terms of my well-being, because I'm one of these people. I don't know about you. Are you wearing a mask, man? Like, what's your whole thing? Like, are you like, oh, look, I just got to avoid, you know, trouble? Like, what's happening with you?
I wear a mask in the hospital because they don't let you in if you can't. I've worn one maybe once or twice when I just couldn't be bothered to deal with people or the repercussions. But for the most part, I don't wear a mask on public transport, even if it's mandatory. If we set aside money for taxes, I think everyone should set aside money for their own freedoms. So I just calculate how much are the fines going to cost? How likely is it that I'm going to get these fines? And I put aside a little bit of a budget so that I can just live freely and hopefully be an example to other people. Because the thing that really annoys me at the train stations is when I see kids wearing masks, and I'm just like, you don't spread. You just don't. If you're sick, stay home. Like you're not and it just like the amount of brainwashing.
It's the social pressure that, Randy.
Me.
I mean, it's one thing if you have a law in place, but the other thing is when you know that if you do have an exemption, if you're a kid even and you're going to school, there are certain schools, I'm not sure if this is happening in Australia, where they're having breathing breaks And if you don't wear a mask, you get essentially put in the naughty corner. Like one, your friends aren't, if your friends are wearing a mask, so you feel weird. There's this peer pressure, but even more than that, you're being reprimanded by your teachers allegedly, and the system for choosing not to wear a mask, even though you have an exemption. And this is playing out on the streets where people that have medical exemptions, like, look, officially, I have asthma. Okay, so I always, so I don't wear a mask. But there are people that have like real, like I have a friend that has severe. Sorry, can you still hear me? Yep. I have a friend that has severe skin problems from wearing a mask, and she's getting bleeds, and she's choosing to wear this because she doesn't want to have a confrontation with a police officer. Because what they're doing is they're asking you to show your exemption, even though you're not required to. They're asking you to explain your medical exemption, even though it's illegal for them to ask you what your medical exemption is. So even though it says on the government website that you have it, you can all you need to do is give a lawful explanation as to why you are not wearing a mask. Police officers not play that game. They're pressuring you, and people don't have to go through all this bullshit of getting a fine and then having to worry about going to court. So they're just going along with it. So there's this coercion, and kids, through whether it's through peer pressure or whether it's through coercion from the police officials, they're giving into it. And this is where I'm at. Like at the heart of this, like I'm not wearing a mask, because I have asthma, it's affecting my breathing. No, because I'm completely against the idea of being forced to do something, But realistically, obviously, in certain situations, if I know someone, I know they're apprehensive about it, I'll wear a mask at the store, and on public transport, like sometimes I'm like, this isn't worth it. But I still don't want to have to go through the trouble of having to go through a court case. So I'm a bit selective in my battles. And this is the problem. Like, even when it's one thing. I'll be real with you. Like, when it comes to a mask, when push comes to shove, if I have to wear this thing, I'll wear it. Like, I'm not going to go crazy over it. But when it comes to things like putting a foreign substance into your body, and this is the heart of what's going on. Let's spend some time on this, bro, because this is where things are getting fucking insane. There is no fucking way that anyone is going to. If I have to spend the rest of my life in jail, so be it. If I have to, like, if it comes down to it, if a police officer is, and we have a law in Western Australia now where police officers can use a proportionate amount of force to force you to be vaccinated if they give you the order to do so. That's actually in the books. That is a direct violation of the Nuremberg Code, Human Rights Charter. It's unconscionable. But we're actually moving to a point now where it's getting to that. And there is no way that I'm going to be forced to do that. But I'm still finding people that are playing this game where they're buying into this game. It's like, oh, look, we just got to do this until, this thing is, well, I don't know. I don't know what they think, but apparently this virus at some point is going to go. I don't see it going anytime soon. And
it's like we're getting nagged into it. Like most people, it's like, take the vax, like that Simpsons, recurring joke where it's like, can you take me to Mount Splashmore? Can you take me? And then the dad finally says, oh, fine, we're going. It's like most people, they just want it to end, and they're just like, okay, fine, I'll take it. I'm sure it's safe. It's fine. I'll take it.
Exactly.
I don't know if I should say this on the channel, but
say it.
I'm just thankful that, in Western Sydney, you can probably find a dodgy doctor who will just tick you off and say, yep, you're clear. You've had the thing.
Well, that's what I'm relying on. Yes, because if you've obviously heard the meme, I'm a trans vaccine, identify as having been vaccinated.
Yeah.
If it comes to the point where I need to go with that in order to avoid like conflict, I'm going to go with that. I know there are people that I've heard this. I don't know if it's true, that apparently been coming up with fake vaccine badges, because at some point initially, I think, where they were administering the vaccine, giving you some kind of passport, like it was something pretty simple, not hard to.
It was a small bit of paper with a bit
so we've been seeing people do that kind of stuff, and I think that's perfectly consistent with libertarian ethics. Like in the interest of self-defense, if someone is coercing me to do something, otherwise is restricting my freedoms. I personally do not have any shape or form, any problem with doing that kind of stuff. It's because it makes me think. Sorry, go on.
It's just ridiculous for someone in our age bracket who are both quite healthy to get it. Like it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like, sure, if you choose to get it, if you're worried, maybe you're not as fit as you once were, maybe you're getting on in life, or maybe you have other comorbidities that you're worried about, then yeah, like that's your risk. That's fine. But to force it just as a general thing amongst the population is just insanity.
Well,
It's
that's the
literally insanity. And the
yeah.
actual technology that they're using,
Mhm.
it's not. It hasn't been tried and tested. Like, and I'm all for deregulation. I think that drugs should be quicker on the market. I'm all for that. But to force something that's been so quickly developed onto people, that's a different story because that takes my choice away. But the mRNA, it's really hard
Careful.
to
Careful, bro.
speak without, let's use the ABC.
Yeah.
We know what I'm talking about. The
YouTube
ABC.
detection is going crazy right now. It's like, oh, are we
Yeah,
gonna have to
yeah.
flag this video? Yeah. But go on,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Go on.
Well, let's just call it the technology
Okay.
has been used in the past. It was called a Hail Mary in 2017. They were saying this is a Hail Mary. If it works, that's crazy that it works. And they've only been testing it on cancer patients. Now, the thing with cancer patients is you can't do long-term tests because most of them pass away because they're cancer patients. Like if you have stage 3 cancer, you're not going to live another 20 years for them to be like, okay, let's see how this technology has worked itself through the system, because you just don't know. So this is the first time they're actually using it on people who don't have a condition. It's just like healthy people. It's the first time they're using it and they have no long-term data, nothing.
Mhm.
It's like, would you buy the first hover car? Probably not. You probably want to buy the 5th one and see, the technology is a little bit better. It's like, would you get laser eye surgery? Like the first person to get it, like it could make you go blind in a year. Like no one knows.
Mhm.
Like I just don't like, if you think the risk is worth it, more power to you. But to
Sure.
force it on other people, I think that's just wrong on
No
too many
doubt.
levels. It's
We're
wrong.
obviously in agreement with that. But here's the crazy thing, right? Okay, because I think most rational, moral people, regardless of what kind of crazy governmental morals you want to buy into, would think that that is a rational argument, right? But what they've done, right, is this sleight of hand at the moment where they've changed the definition of anti-vaxxer, all right? So that if you're even against, I looked this up in the Merriam Dictionary, okay? Now, apparently, I mean, I would have thought that being an anti-vaxxer is someone that is just opposed to vaccines, period. They don't like that. Boom shakalaka is a bad, hate it. But now the definition is people that are against the mandation of the boom shakalaka. So if you're against forcing or having the government use coercion, so essentially forcing you to do things like violating your freedoms, if you're against the government using coercive violence, you're an anti-vaxxer. And that's very interesting to me because it basically makes all libertarians, people that believe in individual freedom, something that was classically defined as morality. Like back in the 50s, I've been watching all these videos of like conversations that have been taking place in the 50s. And it's so fascinating because people would look at communism as being like a bad thing. Like they were, in fact, they were so against it that even the Communist Party at a point was like, oh, we gotta use like communist tactics to prevent them from being able to put these ideas forward, because we could end up in a society where they're forcing people to get the vaccine or something like they're actually talking about what would happen if communism took over. Here we are. But that is now a thing where you're actually considered like, I think ostensibly anti-vaxxers are considered a bad people. Like the government's putting this narrative, we got to do something to get rid of all the anti-vaxxers. But people that are, because here's the thing, if people want to get this thing, by all means, get it, right? Like I'll have a conversation with you if I care about you. But now you're saying that if I'm against forcing people to get this thing, I'm a bad person. Welcome to the 21st century, man. How does it feel, Randy? You are now a certified anti-vaxxer.
Yeah, compliance is a virtue. I'm just going to own it. I'm just going to own it.
Bro,
it's an attempt to delegitimize any form of intelligent argument, to say, oh, well, you must be this label. And it's like, well, like I'm about to get my whooping cough vaccination because I need to, because so there are some tried and tested and true vaccinations that are actually beneficial. And like if you're going to spend time with a newborn baby, you have to have whooping cough vaccine because they actually are too young to get the vaccine, which is great. But the people around that should be, they either should have their immunity or their vaccination, or else it's very, very dangerous. And it's like, Well, why are you calling me anti-vax now? Because I don't want to have this ABC technology put into my body that's only been available for a year. Like that's
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thought there. To me, it goes to the heart of what we're dealing with, because what mother would not want to sacrifice the lives of everyone around her to protect her child, right? It's like
Right.
most people, even though they say they care about freedom, I think most of the normies, including a lot of libertarians, I'm noticing. Like I was listening to I forget his name. I think it's Dave, like he's a comedian, Dave Smith or something
Dave
like that.
Smith.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Dave
Talk
Smith.
about just his attitude towards libertarianism. And he was saying that, look, when it comes down to it, when it comes to my family, I care more about safety. But that's not the libertarian question. The question is whether or not you're willing to use violence in order to bring about safety. But it seems most people in our society are. If it came down to it, in order to protect their children, they would force people to get vaccinated, that force people to leave their homes, do all this kind of stuff because they care so much about them. So that's what we're dealing with. And this is why a lot of people, I think a lot of libertarians make the mistake in saying that the government is some kind of entity that is separate from the people. But fundamentally, I think the people, collectively speaking, are an extension of the government. I mean, this is in theory, right? Granted, governments sometimes go against the wishes of the people, but a lot of the times they represent the will of the people. Even though the government is brainwashing the people into believing what they want them to do, we're seeing a situation where so many people right now are afraid. They've been through the media, through whatever it is, they've been whipped up into this state of fear that they're willing to sacrifice their freedoms, and not only sacrifice their freedom, sacrifice your freedoms. Look, man, I don't want you coming around my baby. You might have some crazy virus. You might have some crazy like anarchist herpes or something like that. And
Yeah, yeah.
thus is the problem, Randy. So what do we do about it? What is the solution to this kind of stuff? Obviously, the content you're putting up, letting people know what's going on, showing the inconsistency of their arguments. What do you do?
I think you've hit on something there, which is that our leaders are manifestations of the majority of the viewpoint of the people, which is, when Donald Trump was elected, people were so divided and so angry. And it's like, well, you actually got the president you deserved. This is a manifestation of what a typical American is actually represented. They're quite obnoxious, they're quite offensive, quite funny, but they're also quite intelligent and get things done. This is what he is. And, he's going to lie, he's going to cheat and steal. But that's a representation of you. And Scott Morrison is a representation of us. We are fat, comfortable mummy's boys, because if we weren't, we wouldn't be complying with all this crap. So the only way to really make positive change is through educating people and through trying to talk to people, talk sense into people. And I find the only way I can do it is if I make slightly ridiculous videos, because if I post a video that's serious on my Facebook timeline, people they'll just be like, nah, he wants to kill grandma. He's an outlier. It doesn't matter. But if I put something that's slightly entertaining, then at least they might get a laugh out of it. And then maybe, just maybe, they'll be like, oh, okay, I haven't thought of it that way. So I recently put out a Fortnite video where it was, trying to explain the Melbourne lockdowns using Fortnite. And the way I did it was, look, if you get a kid to play Fortnite and you turn the power off, he's going to get pissed off. He's going to turn the power back on and then he's going to play again. If you turn it off the second time, he's going to get pissed off. And then by the third time, he's probably not going to play anymore because he knows that you're just going to shut everything down. Now, extend that to the economy. If you just keep shutting people down, and you're opening your cafe and then you close it, you order some supplies and they go to waste, or you start a charity dinner and then they're gone. How many times can you do that before people are like, oh, I'm just not gonna run a business? Like,
absolutely. I love that video, by the way. And whereas I feel like I'd intuitively known that being a libertarian, like it really made me consciously see that. And then this week I experienced that, like I'd recently just gotten this delivery business that I'm doing, kind of like going. And then because of these lockdowns, like strangely enough, like it's just business has plummeted because people aren't working in their businesses and ordering food at the moment. And I'm like, oh, fuck, this is, and I've been hearing from a lot of people. They're like, oh man, I even saw this music video, like, oh my God, we're back again, lockdowns. And it's like, this is depressing. All my plans have gone up in the air. And people, when they have this realization and I think there's something really powerful about comedy. One of the reasons I love your videos is you're very approachable. I think people like you, whereas I think a lot of libertarians can be very polarizing because they don't care about fluff. They care about objective truth. It's like, look, man, you're not making any sense. Get the fuck out of here, kind of thing. I think there's something that happens in comedy where people, it's like when people are in a state of fear, I feel like, and there's this psychology to this. You're less open towards seeing the truth. It's like there's an amygdala hijacking, reptilian brain, flight or flight. So it's like, oh, I don't want to listen to all this reason. This is why we're seeing so much nonsense right now. But when people open up to laughter, it's the opposite. It's like when I'm in a state of laughter, I feel like I'm far more clear. It's like a neutralizing agent. It balances you. It puts you in this flow state. Like I find, as a performer, one of the best gigs I ever had was when I was really, really nervous before I performed. But then someone told me a joke just before I went on, and just in that moment, I forgot what was going on. I was so relaxed, and I just all my fears, left, and I was able to perform so well. Whereas if I hadn't experienced that joke, completely different scenario. And there is something that happens to you. Whether you're having to think or having to do something, when you're in a state of joy and you're laughing, that's when people really get the message. And I think people are really getting the messages that you're putting forth in your videos. So kudos to what you're doing, brother. I've watched I think I've watched all the skits you've done, and I noticed that you actually I feel a little frustrated that I only just realized this now, but I know that you're also a filmmaker, and I only just this morning actually found out that you have at least a couple of films that you've created that I haven't checked out yet. I'm actually on the verge of seeing right now. So do you want to tell us a bit about your filmmaking history and what's going on with that?
Yeah, sure. So like as I mentioned at the start of the show, so there's a half an hour documentary on there called The Art of Deception, which funnily enough was shared by David Icke on his website back in the day before I even knew who he was. And I was like, oh, wow, that's interesting, because I know you're having him on your show soon. Yeah. So I thought I'd drop that. But I made one just before the lockdown started, which is called Another Way, which is a libertarian documentary about Australia specifically. So I talked to David Lionhelm, I talked to Topher Field, I talked to a few Americans, like an American economist, and basically try and give the whole picture. But the premise of that film is leapfrogging off the lockdowns in Sydney in terms of the nightclub lockdowns. I don't know if you know much about the lockdowns.
I know in Sydney they have these restrictions where artists aren't able to perform after certain hours, and because I was thinking of going there, then I found out, I'm like, what? That's ridiculous. I can't perform after a certain hours. So
so they just killed. So someone got king hit. Like that's a tragedy. That's a bad thing. But then they locked down nightlife. They were like, okay, you have to be inside the pub by 10 p.m.
So wait. What was it that actually happened that led to these lockdowns? You mentioned that I don't know the story.
Someone was king hit and killed, like in King's Cross. So as a
king hit, that's actually
night, and someone just ran. Yeah. So they ran past, punched him in the head. The kid dies. He's like 19 or 18. So it's actually quite a sad thing that happened.
No doubt.
But as a response to that, they said, okay, well, citizens, if you can't party responsibly, you can't party at all. And they closed it. So King's Cross is dead. Nightlife is dead in Sydney. They slowly rolled it back, but then the actual lockdowns across the state happened. And so I leapfrogged off that. I said, okay, well, if they can tell you when you can go out at night or when you can run your business, they can tell you anything. And here we are. And this is the craziest thing is, not only were they able to dictate what we did outside of our homes during lockdowns, like you can only stay outside for an hour, you can only go with 1 or 2 people, you can only do this X, Y, and Z, but also inside your home, you can only have 5 people. And I thought, well, what don't you have control over? You have control over my income, my job, what I do outside my home, what I do inside my home. And I was just like, well, this is absolutely ridiculous. But before this came out just before the lockdowns. So I talked to all these libertarians and we discussed the philosophy. We discussed the economics behind it. We discussed the wars. That's probably my favorite segment. If anyone wants to skip straight to that, that's a really powerful segment where we talk about the amount of lives lost in all of these foreign intervention wars and what we got out of it and what we should be doing. And I find that to be a very powerful section. And we also talk about central banks at the end, because the craziest thing is that, conspiracy theorists will, when I say, I mean the actual conspiracy theorists will come up with all of these theories and all of these crazy things like it's lizard people or it's this or it's that, or, it's a cabal of Jewish people running the world or this or that. But the thing that's in plain sight, which we can all see, is the central banks. And the central banks is the number one mechanism for perpetuating war, for funding governments, for manipulating the money supply, for stealing money off us. And it's not a conspiracy. It's like, it's in your face, and you only have to look at it for 5 minutes to be like, well, this is wrong. And so, the place to start really, like, apart from education and individuals finding enlightenment and finding personal responsibility, if we want to talk about big picture stuff, it's ripping down these central banks and
absolutely
getting back to sound money would be amazing. But yeah, so that's called Another Way. You can check that out. It goes for about an hour and a half. But
I will.
Yeah,
I'm so glad you brought that up, man. Because one of the things I actually wanted to get into you, and I know your time is valuable, brother, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up, was the central banks. You were talking about. I was going to mention something else, but I did want to get your view on Bitcoin, bro. Because obviously, that's what I wanted to mention, by the way. That's libertarians always say taxation is theft, and people think like, what? Why? Because it all comes down to how all of this stuff is funded. Like all the lockdowns that are going on right now, all the military, dropping bombs in countries with lots of black and brown people. This is all being fueled through the taxation. It all comes down to money, and it's all stolen money. And one of the ways, one of the things that I've become like really bullish on is the cryptocurrency space, because this is a way of not having to rely on this fiat system, which essentially is used to drop bombs on people. So what are your thoughts on the whole Bitcoin space? Is that something that you've delved into?
It's interesting. I think the technology has a ways to go, and I have hope for it. But for money to be money, that volatility that we see in Bitcoin and other cryptos is way too much for people to actually use it as a currency. It's all speculation. It's like, I'm going to buy some and hopefully Elon Musk sends a tweet, and then I'll be good and I can get my real money out of it. So people don't see it as a money yet. Although smart contracts are very, very exciting concept. So things like that. But I'm old school, man. I just put some of my income into silver and gold. And
sure, man.
So, but crypto is interesting. I think Bob Murphy was very against it early on, but now he's actually like full on board. So it's interesting. I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
my answer is I don't know.
No. Well, that's a very humble and a very intelligent attitude to have. I think if we said that more often, if the government said that more often, it certainly would dropping bombs on people.
Can you imagine that? That. So when do you think we'll be? When do you think things will be back to? I don't know.
But look, in regards to and this is something. In fact, my entire journey into the world of economics started around Bitcoin when I started actually reading books on Austrian economics and understanding the philosophy behind this, and listening to people like Roger Ver, Peter Schiff talking about how all this stuff works and the theory behind it. And then it started to make a lot of sense to me, like how money is actually formed, sound money, like the properties of it, fungible, robust, like transferable, easily, all that kind of stuff. And one of the things I would say, just to address whether or not Bitcoin is something that is feasible in the future, is that you have a look at most fiat currencies, and they tend to have a very short lifespan. Most fiat currencies within the space of 100 years usually go to zero. And granted, we see a tremendous amount of volatility within Bitcoin. Granted, that may be the case. I don't think that's going to be the case forever. It's volatile at the moment, but I think we reach a point where this is massively, massively adopted, and you start seeing less volatility. Granted, Bitcoin is going up. It at the moment goes up by 30% a week and then goes down again. That being said, when you have a look at fiat currencies, they also have a lot of volatility. But what's happening is, because they're being manipulated, like, I'm sure you understand this better than I do.
Yeah.
It seems as if we're not seeing this volatility when the government is really printing out lots and lots of money and manipulating certain forces in order to mitigate the volatility. Whereas Bitcoin, it doesn't have all of this manipulation taking place. And it's also worth mentioning that you have a look at certain currencies like in Venezuela and things like that, and they would see you'd see more volatility than you're seeing in Bitcoin. And one of the reasons they'd embrace Bitcoin is because their dollar, like within the space of a few hours, it can go from like up to down just like that. And when this thing first took off a few years back, I was actually donating money to certain countries in Venezuela, and they were relying heavily on Bitcoin Cash. That's one of the
Yeah.
forks
Yeah.
and that's because the transaction fee wasn't as much, and they found a lot of usability in that because it wasn't anywhere near as volatile as their currency, and it was so
Mm.
much easier to do things. So, and the fact that it's such an easy way of interacting with people. Like if I send money to World Vision, obviously it's gonna so little of the money is actually gonna get to these people, But
Mm.
I could send something like a fraction of a dollar to these people through certain cryptocurrencies, and then that would pay for like a whole week of food. So
Yeah.
the usability of this is really where I think we're going to see the most amount of like this is going to pave the way to adoption. I mean, it's useful. It's so easy to transact. But
Mm.
they're my thoughts. I'm a big Bitcoin junkie.
Yeah, I think you would love that. There's a guy in the documentary I just mentioned, a Venezuelan guy who explains what's going on in Venezuela. And at one point, not in the documentary, but just behind the scenes, he pulled up the Opal card that he was using, and he's like, "This is worth so much money in Venezuela because it's got, it's connected to Australian dollars and it's not connected to the Venezuelan money." And it was really funny. But he's a super funny guy. But yeah, yeah, the Bitcoin thing, as I said, I do have hope. And once the volatility kind of settles down, we'll see what happens. But yeah, at the moment, I'm just that old school. I just have gold, oil, and ammo, without the oil
Hardcore,
and
brother.
ammo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
look, just to wind things down in terms of the future, because I know you're in Sydney. I'm not sure if you're facing. Did you say Sydney? Sydney, right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not sure if things are as heavy weighted as they are here in Melbourne. But what's the outlook at the moment and in the future in terms of everything that's going on here? Are you greatly affected by things, and where do you see this thing going?
It's very interesting because if we were to go somewhere, where would we go? Because it seems like attitudes are quite similar across the globe. So it's quite similar. I can tell you that Sydney house prices are still crazy. They've been the craziest in the country for a long time. And to take a slight step back as well, one of the reasons why house prices are still crazy is because the central banks have printed so much money that the people with wealth are like, well, this isn't going to be worth much. So they're putting it into houses. So we have all these empty houses because rent has never been cheaper. The rent in Sydney is crazy cheap.
Same here in
because all the
Melbourne, man.
international students are gone, right? So there's all these empty buildings, but all these wealthy people are buying them because they don't want their money to be worth nothing. So it's very interesting. So I don't know what the future of Sydney is going to be. I can tell you there will be another lockdown around the corner because it's only a matter of time. Because when they're ready, when they have the numbers to roll out the thing, they'll put us in a lockdown and then put us out like that. That will happen. So, yeah, I'm not sure what the future of Sydney is, but I do know that if we want to get to the other side of this, people just need to wake up and stop. I think my word of encouragement is to know that people aren't alone in their views, and that they should, if you're brave enough, leave your house without a mask. If you're brave enough, put up a Facebook status that says, what you think. It's funny that Facebook came out and said that, hey, we're gonna change the algorithm to make it more kind on people who are saying this about the vaccine. It's like, okay, so you were censoring people. It's like, oh, well, maybe. So the censorship is slightly less now, but at least they're transparent about it.
Oh, I didn't know that. Is that something that came into effect just recently?
Yeah, it came into effect like last week. I can't remember what the phrase was, but it was, I think it was because it might be around the Wuhan lab stuff, because when that was confirmed, they were like, okay, so we're going to allow articles that are about the Wuhan lab, because before that it was a conspiracy theory, right?
I mean, everything is a conspiracy theory until 2020, until we start seeing so many of the biggest conspiracy theories manifest. It's like, I was saying just a year ago, man, that no, this thing, we're going to be seeing mandatory vaccine. Oh, that's ridiculous, man. Here we are.
Well, the first article that came out about that, and questioning Scott Morrison about it, it says in bold print, it says, no, there won't be mandatory vaccines. But then underneath the quote continues saying, we just don't have the resources to hold everyone down. It's like, he actually said that. It's because we can't hold you down that there's not because, you know, we want it to be a choice. It's like, oh no, because we can't hold you down physically, all of you. There's too many of you, you know, too many plebs.
No doubt. But Randy, there is a sleight of hand at play, whereas the definition changes. It changes from mandatory no longer like Scott Morrison came out to say, when he first came out to say that this thing was going to be mandatory, he got such a backlash that he said, oh no, I didn't mean it was going to be mandatory. What I said mandatory, I meant like we're not going to force you to take this thing, we're not going to make it compulsory. And so he just changed the definition and said, oh look, we're just going to, you know, like no jab, no pay, that kind of stuff. And then later on, months later, he says, oh no, look, no, we like, they slowly changed the definition. Now it's oh no, it's going to be voluntary now. Voluntary means that you won't be able to partake in society unless, of course, you get the jab. You won't be able to leave your home, but it's voluntary. So there's a sleight of hand I'm seeing at play.
Yeah, it's very sadistic. It's like,
but I got to tell you, man, like I am, in terms of the future, I'm worried in terms of just seeing people actually want this stuff, because it's one, I don't think you can overthrow a government when the people actually want something, because the people to some extent are the government. If so many people were against what the government was doing, it would be another thing entirely. But the interactions I'm having with most people is that even though, and I can read people, like I can feel what they're saying, and there's still this tremendous apprehension in regards to getting the virus. And they're, when I tell them that people are being forced to take this thing, they're like, yeah, but you know, what's going to happen to my grandma? And I'm like realizing that, okay, so I feel like the effort here is to change the culture. Like the real task is to, rather than trying to, I guess, campaign and so forth, I think doing things like comedy, music, like trying to change the culture of the times to get people to actually value things like freedom. That's the best approach to this, because until that changes, we're going to be living in a society where people value their safety over their freedom.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at with this. But bro, I seriously respect the kind of stuff you're doing. You brought about a lot of laughter watching your videos over the last few years, man. They're absolutely amazing content. Highly recommend people checking out your channel, The Deactivist. I know do you want to share some of your other contacts, your other social media points for people?
Sure. I mean, the best one would be YouTube. So it's YouTube/Deactivist, but you can also find me on Instagram. You can follow my personal, because I'm on there more, which is @RandyDeactivist, and drop me a message if you want me to do anything. I'll be a performing monkey. I don't care. But yeah, man, it was a good conversation, man. Thanks for having me on. Can we expect any new music soon? I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, I've actually had a vocal condition over the last, like most of last year, you know, so I've just been rebuilding my voice, but I plan on getting straight into it. You know, like I'm on the verge of doing some gigs once these lockdowns are over in 2050. We'll see how we go. But yeah, thanks for asking, brother. Definitely looking to making some music content and doing some more of these interviews. I'd love to have you back again, brother. You're a scholar, you're a clown, and a gentleman, all wrapped up in one. And it's a pleasure having people like you that value freedom and also are able to don't take things too seriously, to kind of lighten the mood. So continue doing what you're doing, and until next time, brother, peace out, keep it real. Don't drive in Texas.
Thank you, my friend.
Thanks for coming on the Critical Journey, brother. God bless.
No worries. See ya.
Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Randall Evans, libertarian, comedian, content creator. Be sure to check out his stuff. I'll put the links down below. And let us know what you think about this podcast. Give us a rating. It's on iTunes. We'll be putting this up eventually on Spotify. Until next time, this is the Chocolate Nubian Soul Brother, aka the Esoteric Noetic. Illuminate your minds with wisdom. Strengthen your will with love. Purge all negative thought patterns from your existence. Signing out, Chris Jewell.
Told me that it can't be done, but I told you the battle was over before the game was done. Now if you think that I'm gonna let you run my body, my heart, and my mind, then you